Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legendarium podcast. I'm your host, Craig Hanks, and over there with me today to talk about the wonder, the modern wonder that is self-publishing. And I mean that's a double-edged statement there, and we can probably get into some of that. But it's Philip Chase. Philip, how are you?
I'm doing great, Craig. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about self-publishing and fantasy. And I had a great time last time we talked about Beowulf, and I'm sure this is going to be more of the same.
Well, I hope so. This is a subject that I think listeners will find both interesting and helpful, whether they are writers or not, because I find joy in being at least a somewhat more savvy consumer of things. Whatever that thing may be, understanding a little bit about how the sausage is made, to use the old cliche, can inform your decisions on what kind of art you take in and how you take it in and how you understand it. And so that's kind of the goal of this, is whether you're a writer who's looking at self-publishing or you're a reader who says either, I'm looking for great self-published books, or I'll never read anything that's self-published because X, Y, or Z. People have their reasons. I'm hoping this conversation will be illuminating. You know what? I should do my housekeeping first. Go to thelegendarium.com for the links to Discord, to Patreon. And there's also, let's see, I'm trying to think if this episode is coming out before our 10th anniversary celebration, but there is a link to that. That'll happen in February 2024. So people can check that out if it hasn't already occurred yet. And then the other thing is, make sure you hit the show notes, because I will provide links to Philip's YouTube channel, which you should definitely check out, as well as his books. So, Philip, The Way of Edan is the first book in is it the Edan trilogy? Yes, it is.
Okay. Correct. That is correct.
Which you were kind enough to send me a copy of. So I've got it here. And sure enough, you flip to the copyright page, and it's very, very small. There's not much to worry about there, because you indeed self-published. Why don't we start at 30,000 feet at the beginning and ask the question, why did you self-publish? What was going through your mind, and what were some of the concerns and hopes you had for the process?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Happy to go there. To tell you the truth, and when I say initially, we're talking, I started writing in 2004 and finished a draft of what would become books 1 and 2 by 2007. At that point, I started to look for an agent. It took me, because I thought I was going to go the traditional route back then. And it took me a few years, but by the end of 2011, I had an agent. Yay. So essentially, I won the lottery once, but to publish traditionally, you have to win the lottery not once, not twice, but 3 times really to be successful in the traditional publishing world. So you have to get an agent. That's lottery number 1. That's just, first, of course, you have to write a book that some agent is going to be interested in, right? So that's a lot of hard work to begin with, but then you have to find an agent. There's a whole process to that, querying, etc. And then the other time you win the lottery, number 2, is when that agent convinces a publisher to take on the project. And that's an even more rarer occurrence. And then the third time you win the lottery in traditional publishing is when the publisher actually backs your book. Because
I was just going to get there.
Yeah, as you know, probably, a traditional publisher, this is the way I understand that it works. You basically have, let's say they publish 20 books in the year, and 1 or 2 of them are doing really well. Those are the ones they're going to put everything behind, and the rest are on their own. They leave them to wither, or it's really up to the author to get out there and hustle and market their own book, essentially. So anyway, yeah, I did get an agent, and we, for several years, as I finished what would become books 1 and 2, and then eventually 3, he did do a few pitches, and we didn't get anywhere. And finally, near the end of 2022, we just had a conversation, a very frank and helpful conversation, because I really loved working with the guy. He was fantastic. He was very helpful to me. and he served as a kind of developmental editor as well, and helped me to improve the books. And that's what a good agent will do. But we agreed that it just, the kind of writing I'm doing very, you might have heard, more classical kind of fantasy mixed with modern, but a lot of classical medieval type fantasy vibes. And that's not what publishers are looking for these days. So I basically decided, along with my agent, let's just go ahead and try to self-publish. And of course, I didn't just wake up one morning and say, "Yep, let's do it." It took a lot of homework and research and looking into it. And I did eventually do it in 2023. I published all 3 books in 1 year, which, by the way, you probably could never do with a traditional publisher. You put out all 3 books of the trilogy in 1 year. But I had written the books. I had been working on them for years. So I thought, why not? I have creative control. I have control over the timeline. This is one of the big advantages to self-publishing. And I also, by the way, in addition to that agent, I worked with a developmental editor that I hired, a great fellow by the name of A.P. Canavan, who has a YouTube channel called The Critical Dragon. Brilliant person.
He's been on the pod, a friend of the pod, A.P. Canavan.
Yep. He's just absolutely brilliant, and I love working with him. And so, that's a very important thing I mentioned, because if you are going to go self-publishing, I believe it's important to do it right, and it's not cheap. But they estimate you'd spend anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to self-publish a book. If you're doing all these things, you get a good artist, you get a cover designer, you have, if I have a map in my book, I had to hire a guy to make the map look nice. All these steps. So I had to learn a lot, and I had to learn how to use Vellum, which is a software that you can use to format your book, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
But I have no regrets that I was essentially forced into self-publishing. Not forced because I didn't have to publish, but because I didn't make it into traditional publishing. I actually wish I had looked into self-publishing earlier, to tell you the truth, because it's been such a satisfying process. And these days, it is so viable, and even in some respects more desirable than traditional publishing.
Well, you say you wish you had considered it earlier, and who knows when would have been the right time.
Right.
That's part of the crapshoot that is all media, really. Ask any movie studio executive or a TV executive or a publishing person. Ask them, what's the secret sauce, and everybody, anybody who knows what they're talking about in that arena will throw up their hands and say, "I have no idea. I made my millions on luck," or whatever. It takes the right book with the right audience at the right time, and you never know what that time is going to be. I will say this for anybody listening who hasn't picked up the Edan trilogy, you maybe should, because I'm hearing rumblings just on our Discord server, on Twitter, Twitter X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. There are people who are picking up the book, and the word of mouth is a wonderful thing, right? It's going to be your most powerful tool as a self-published author. Anyway, so people should definitely check it out. Oh, you know what? I want to go back into something you were saying earlier. So you and your agent decided, okay, so self-publishing is going to be the route to go.
Yeah.
Brass tacks, does that mean that you and your agent decided, okay, it's time for us to part ways because an agent is supposed to find you a publisher? Or did the agent stay on during the self-publishing process in some capacity? How did that work?
Yeah, I'd love to address that. First, I do want to mention that I really enjoy talking to the green team of the Legendarium about the books. So I've had the opportunity to talk to them about all 3 books separately, and so they covered the trilogy. So some of my favorite conversations about the trilogy actually were done by the green team. So yeah.
Hey, you know what? How many plugs can we fit in the first 10 minutes? This is an awesome record. And you know what? You're right. Those discussions were a lot of fun. So shout out to the green team, big time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but the agent and I had a really great conversation, and we agreed that I would go the self-publishing route, and which means he gets nothing out of it. He has no, stake, let's say, no financial stake in my success at this point. However, we just agreed with each other that if at some point a traditional publisher for some reason became interested in taking me on, that he would represent me again. So he would be happy to come back in and fulfill that agent role. And that's just, I think, an individual case by case thing.
Right. Is that like a handshake agreement, or you
pretty
guys
much.
have something down in writing? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much handshake. Yeah.
Which, as long as you've got two people who are good at keeping their handshake arrangements, is a-okay.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Well, I almost feel bad because he put time. He read all my books. He gave me editorial feedback.
Right.
I think he helped me make them better, and he's getting nothing out of it at this point. So I would actually be really happy to work with him again if that were ever necessary. But yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's see. I'm getting some questions from listeners in Discord, so I'm just making sure that there isn't something that I should slot in right here.
Cool.
But let me go this. Oh, you know what? No, I'm going to go with Cody Lloyd's question. Okay, because this is another kind of broad question that could take us any number of directions.
Okay.
Cody Lloyd caveats this by saying, I am definitely planning self-publishing. Okay, so keep that in mind.
Okay.
And he asks for advice for someone, raises his hand, that's written a couple of novels, but isn't sure what the next steps should really be to move forward, actually getting them out into the world. So you've got the content. Let me put this into terms that I also want people to be familiar with, and that's whether it's podcasts or YouTube videos, the content that I put out there and that you put out there, that, it's not your books, but all sorts of content creation. There's the core piece of content, but like you alluded to earlier, there are 20, 50, 100 other steps that go into getting it out into the world. So if it's a YouTube video, sure, you've got your raw video, but now you've got to edit it down. Now you got to do the color editing. Oh, you got to make sure the audio is nice. Okay, do you have an intro package? Oh, do you have a thumbnail that's going to be compelling? How good are you at titling? There's a million things besides that core piece of content. So Cody Lloyd, I think, is asking, all right, I've got the novels written. Maybe they're in a Google Doc or something. What now? What's the next step?
My instinct is to, if Cody has not yet done this, find a good developmental editor. And also, I did my own. So I'm an English professor as in my day job, and I'm very used to doing proofreading. So I did my own copy editing. But a lot of people hire a copy editor, and those are two separate things. Developmental editor, copy editor, two very different things. You would want to go with the developmental editor first. And the last stage of the writing is going to be copy editing, where you're fixing all the little typos and in the commas and all the little things. I did not myself hire a copy editor, though, because I felt more or less that I hope, anyway, after 25 years of being an English professor, that I know where a comma goes and all that stuff.
This is actually a really interesting spot for me to interject. I often say, there's no such thing, and this goes for short form writing as well. I do a lot of blogs and that sort of thing. There's no such thing as self-editing, which I think is true, but is obviously most true of developmental stages. So you're talking about, how do I arrange this section? Where does this chapter go? Is the pacing right throughout the book, right? Versus a copy editor who's going line by line.
Correct.
Through the minutia, right? So that one, I think that's fair. You can do that yourself.
Yeah. No, but I'm really glad that I went and got the professional help, and it's not cheap. I have to say, it's thousands of dollars. There are editor association websites that you can go to and find out the rates, and it does differ a little bit according to genre, but it is not cheap. It will add up to thousands. Just for the developmental editing. But I'm very glad I did it. It did help me to make the books, I feel, as good as I can make them. So I think that would be my advice to Cody, is to think about an editor and to find a professional if you can afford it. And the other steps would be to engage a good artist. And again, if you hire someone who's a well-known painter who does a lot of fantasy covers, you're going to spend thousands of dollars on that. But you can find people who are just getting going, artists who work more digitally. I personally would not go with an AI cover. They're, of course, very cheap, but a lot of people will refuse to buy your book if there's anything AI about it at all. So I would steer away from AI entirely, even if it's tempting to get an AI cover because, yeah, you can do it for almost nothing.
Right.
But yeah, so those are all those things to consider. And then there's the marketing part, which we'll talk about, I'm
Mhm.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, let's stick with kind of that initial I've got my content, now what question. My brother is an accountant who
Uh-huh.
works with dentists and helps them buy dental practices. And never in your life have you heard of a more exciting job, right? But part of his pitch is, if you hire my company, you're not just getting an accountant, you're getting somebody who's worked in this industry for a long time. So I know all of the bankers, the lawyers, the brokers, the people you need to know to make this whole thing happen. When you say your next step should be a developmental editor, that started like pinging those centers in my brain. And I'm thinking, is that part of the consideration where is there a hub? Could you hire somebody for, several $1,000s to do an edit of your book, and also be getting somebody who knows other people in the industry and can plug you in with agents and with publishers? Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, yes, indeed. I mean, there are a lot of places you can go to meet people. One thing you can do is to look at the acknowledgments in books that you like, whether they be self-published or traditionally published, and find out the names of people who work as advanced readers or
Mm,
developmental editors. For example, the AP Canavan, who is my developmental editor, is also an advanced reader for Stephen Erickson and Ian Esselmont and other fantasy writers. So you'll find his name in the acknowledgments. So that's one way, one method, I suppose. The other thing I would strongly advise anyone who's considering self-publishing is to get ahead and start networking on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and become part of the self-publishing community that exists there. There's a whole fantasy self-publishing community out there. And these are people who tend to be very supportive of one another. And if you put out a tweet or a post, is that what we're calling them now? A post or a tweet?
who knows?
Put out a tweet just saying, "Hi, I'm an aspiring self-publishing author. I'm looking for some great people who do developmental editing. Anyone have any suggestions? And you will get an outpouring of suggestions, and you can do your homework on those people as well. So, which I definitely advise you to do. As I said, it's good to work with somebody who likes the sort of thing that you're trying to do. So
Right.
it does behoove you to do your homework.
So yeah, it's not just first come first serve. I'll take anybody as my developmental editor. You want to make sure there's a good match there.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's see. I've got. Ooh. Uh, that's funny. Lady Sweden on Discord can't hear us. She can't hear us right now, but
Oh.
she asks, "How big a difference did it make to have a professional editor? Any advice for others who can't get AP?"
Oh.
uh, so if somebody can't go that route, hey, I just don't have the capital to hire somebody to do that.
Yeah.
Gosh, are you up a creek? What do you do?
I understand that. And so there are groups, authors will get together sometimes and give each other feedback, which is valuable. I think that sometimes that can go very wrong if you have somebody who's a little sensitive, or
Mhm.
maybe there's just bad group dynamics. But I've heard of it going right as well. And there are a lot of people who will say, "Yeah, I got a lot out of my editing group that I was part of." So that's a more affordable possible option.
I remember hearing about something 100 years ago called the Tinklings or the Winklings or something. Whatever. I don't remember.
The Dinklings, yeah, yeah, yeah. They might have helped each other a wee bit there, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that option, and obviously you're going to show your book to your close friends. Well, I did anyway. Maybe not
Mhm.
everyone would do this, but your friends and your family. The problem there is they want to be supportive of you, and it's hard to be critical of someone you're close to. and sometimes they just don't have the vocabulary or
Right. The
the
skills for it.
know-how to actually give you. There is a big difference between somebody like AP and your mother, who, unless your mother is a developmental editor, um, because most of the time your mother is going to be, this is great, sweetie, and not really know how to give you the kind of feedback you're going to need to make it better.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
there are cheaper ways to go about it. But I think ultimately, if you can possibly afford the developmental editor, it is something to think about. You also need to think about, though, uh, um, how much you want to spend on this, because a lot of people, the vast majority, don't make money self-publishing. So having a marketing plan is very important as well, especially if you're going to put in the capital to hire a developmental editor and a good artist, etc.
Yeah. This is a personal question, so feel free to punt if you'd like to. But
Okay.
let me ask you what your goal was by publishing at all. Whether you're talking about when you first started out 15 years ago, or when you finally decided to pull the trigger on self-publishing. Like you say, this is not necessarily a money-making operation.
Yeah.
So, what were you hoping to get out of this?
Yeah. Well, I would say
If not maybe it's millions of dollars. Hey, that's fine too.
not millions, but I have, you know, I might have shared with you before. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was 12, and as soon as I finished it, I thought to myself, "That's what I want to do. I want to
Mm,
write. I want to do. I want to do this for people. What J.R.R. Tolkien just did for me. That's what I want to do for people." So I don't know. It was Samuel Johnson who said, "No one but a blockhead ever wrote for anything but money." And I guess I'm a big blockhead because I just needed to write. I wanted to write. I didn't think a whole lot about the financial side of it. I knew I needed a day job. I was advised to get one by a writer I met when I was 13, 14 years old, and says, "Hey, great,
mm,
you want to write, but you probably need a day job."
yeah,
And so, yeah, I did a PhD and all that, and became an English professor. But I always knew I wanted to write. And so 2 years into my first full-time job, I started. And, I really wanted to share that story with people. And I have to be honest. I would love to be able to make a living as a writer. That
mm,
would be amazing if I could get to that point. I'm nowhere near that yet, but I've been successful to the degree that I've actually made a little money on the trilogy already. So that's great. So it looks like something that isn't entirely impossible, I guess,
yeah,
but you have to do a lot of things, to put in a lot of work, and you need a bit of luck as well.
yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a subject that we can't really dig into because it's so
Yeah.
unpredictable. But it's people ask me, after a decade doing this podcast, when are you going to write your book? What's your
Yeah.
book going to be about?
Yeah.
And I would love to answer with, oh yeah, it'll be out next summer. But ultimately, I don't have whatever the motivation is for an individual person. I don't have that. I don't have a story I need to tell. I
Uh-huh.
don't have something I need to prove to myself.
Yeah.
Whatever my motivation might be, it's not there. So my book is not forthcoming. Um, so, but it's an interesting question to ask
Probably
yourself
because you're
if you're,
sane, Craig. I'm guessing it's because you're sane. Yeah.
well, I'd like to think so. Those closest to me might argue the point, but no, if you're thinking about writing a book, you better have a darn good reason because,
Yeah.
even just coming up with that core piece of content, that is a heavy, heavy lift. And then there are the 100 steps after that to actually get it out into the world.
Yeah.
So it's a good question, I think, having your why. Now, let's see. Chesky Kurja on Discord asks, what was the biggest surprise with self-publishing?
Ooh. Wow.
Think
The biggest
fast.
surprise. Yeah. Huh. Um, maybe it was how much, because look, there's no way that anyone writes a book and believes 100% of the time, this is the best thing ever. Everyone is going to love this. You will have days when you think, what am I doing? This is just awful. People are going to hate this. And then you'll have days when, this isn't too bad, I think, this could be okay. What's been maybe my most pleasant surprise is the reaction of readers who have not just understood what I was trying to do, but have told me that it was an amazing emotional journey. I've had readers tell me that I was crying through the last 20% of book 3, and I just found that so moving. And thank you so much. And I was like, yeah, that's what I wanted. That's amazing. Some readers actually are getting out of this what I was always hoping, and I guess that's been a very satisfying thing to have. Just that surprised me how wonderful it feels to have the story come alive by having readers and people who are responding to the story. It's amazing. It's a really beautiful feeling.
Yeah, it's like I was saying earlier, the secret sauce is the right book with the right audience at the right time, and that second part of it, it can be so nerve-wracking for any what a crass term to put on this, but for any content creator.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's kind of terrifying to put your stuff out there, because what if nobody likes it? But your audience is out there.
yeah,
It's just a matter of finding them and them finding you. So,
yeah,
which actually brings me to the subject that we mentioned earlier, but need to come back to, and that's marketing.
yeah.
So traditional publishing promises, or it can promise sometimes that, hey, at least people will get your book in their hands this way, because a traditional
Right.
publisher is going to take care of that marketing for you. Well, unfortunately, the reality is somewhat different. I remember talking to uh, an author that shall remain unnamed, who is one of the top authors at the number 2 or 3 publisher in the country of fantasy and science fiction, Tor being number 1, right? And I remember asking, do you ever want to jump ship and go over to Tor? He's like, look, if I go to Tor, I'll be number 5 or 6 on their totem pole, and that is high.
Hmm.
That is high ranking, and yet I won't get near the resources that somebody like a Brandon Sanderson would, their number 1 guy at Tor.
Right,
He's going to
right,
get a ton of concessions and resources. I'd much rather be number 1 at this other publishing house, where they're going to give me everything they've got because
right.
I'm their moneymaker. Um, so that gives a little
Smart. Yeah.
insight into what, like, even being a New York Times bestseller and going to another publisher where you're, number 5 or 6 on the list, and
Yeah.
you feel like you're getting hosed. Picture being a brand new, unproven writer who
Yeah.
gets picked up by a publisher, and you know none of that marketing ever comes to pass. They say, hey, we
Right.
printed your book, have fun selling it. And
Yep.
so it's just one of those things about traditional publishing that is often a misconception, I think. Uh, so were you looking forward to having a publisher do your marketing, or have you always been kind of prepared to do this on your own?
Yeah, so the only one advantage, of course, that traditional publishers have, or authors who go that route, who are fortunate
Mm,
enough to go that route, is that they will get your book into bookstores, and
right.
that's great. That said, if you look at the share of book purchases that were online a decade ago and compare that to the share today, it's gone from like a third to 3/4.
Right.
Most book sales are online right now. So yeah, there is that factor, but that's less and less and less important, frankly, as time goes by. There's never been a better time to self-publish. And the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of traditionally published authors are going to have to do their own marketing, just like self-published authors. They're out there hustling on social media, just like we are. And they don't really have any advantage. In fact, you look at the percentages will vary according to author, but if you're a traditionally published author, you're getting about 7, maybe 10% of each sale. And whereas the deal with Amazon, we can talk about working with KDP or working with Ingram Spark and that sort of thing if you like later. These are routes that you can go when you're self-publishing. But you're getting 60% of a physical book, at least in theory. It's more complicated than that, but you're getting a much higher percentage. And you're getting 70% if it's an ebook. And that's just not going to happen for a traditionally published author. So you're doing your own marketing anyway. Why not take the lion's share of the profit? So I think that's a valid question that anybody should ask if they're thinking about publishing and they're not sure they're going to be in the top 1% of the authors on their publishing, of their publishers.
Yeah. Do you, you know what? I want to save that question for the very end. Okay. So I'll save that one. Let's see. I want to make sure we get listener questions in there. Wombat, who I believe is the artist formerly known as Combat Wombat, is he, you, Philip, are you planning on doing any self-publishing for future works?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I actually have a sequel already, a draft written, and I'll be working on that this year. It's called Wild Darkness Gathers, and I'm hoping to put that out this year. And then I want to continue. My ideal is that I can somehow publish one book a year. That would be my goal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That would be a remarkable clip.
Yeah.
And I cheer you on from the sidelines. I couldn't do it. That actually kind of answers Lord Ash's question, which is, are you happy with your experience in self-publishing? The answer must be at least a qualified yes, because if you're going to do it again. So that's interesting. And your experience is probably largely driven by what I perceive as your marketing, which I'm sure there's a ton, the duck's feet are going crazy under the surface and all that. There's a lot more that goes into it, but basically you are a content creator who has put yourself out there in the community and become known for, this or that opinion or video that you put out there. And that is going to be big as well, right? Some of the most successful podcasters out there aren't podcasters. They're lawyers who start a podcast, or they're publishers who start a podcast, or they're sports stars who start a podcast, right? And so it can kind of work the other way around as well, where, hey, I'm going to put some content out there with my YouTube channel and get people to know and like and trust me. Then when I put my book out, I've got a built-in audience to at least get the ball rolling, right? Has that been your experience?
I can't say I was smart enough to do any of this very deliberately. I started writing before YouTube existed. I believe YouTube wasn't around in 2004. And I believed that I would go traditional, and that didn't happen. And I was still, though, not certain of self-publishing when I started my YouTube channel in February of 2020. And the immediate motivation there was I had a fantasy novels course that I was teaching at my college that I had created, and this was supposed to be a supplement to my course. I thought, hey, I'll just try a YouTube channel to see if that'll make the course a little snazzier. I didn't know that BookTube existed. I didn't know that people were talking about fantasy on YouTube. I thought I might be the first, and I was very, very far from it. And I discovered a whole community, which is another, by the way, great surprise for me. It shouldn't have been, but it was a surprise and a wonderful one. The community that exists online is just wonderful. It's tremendous, very supportive, wonderful people who are passionate about fantasy. So you're absolutely right that things worked out well for me in that sense, that for the most part, I would say having a YouTube channel has been a real net positive for self-publishing and marketing my book. It hasn't been entirely positive. There are definitely people out there who are, for whatever reason, resentful, of people who have BookTube channels who publish books. I had people leave comments on my videos saying, well, you're a booktuber, so your book is going to suck, never mind that I was writing this thing years and years and years before I was a booktuber, but and I've had even worse comments. I've had horrible reviews from people who apparently think that I'm the worst person in the world for having a YouTube channel and self-publishing.
Oh no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
We all know it.
Yeah, must be true.
We all, it is. I love YouTube for the reasons that you point out. You never know who's going to find your content, and there are people out there who will enjoy it. But the YouTube comments section, I mean, second only to maybe Reddit as far as major social media channels. Like as far as you better tread lightly around here. You never know what you're going to get. YouTube
it's comments. Crazy. I mean, I will say 99% of my interactions have been very positive.
Oh yeah,
and people are very supportive. But I just as a way of putting it out there to anyone who's considering this sort of thing, if you get to any point, and I'm still kind of a small channel, really. And when you look at the grand scheme of things, I'm a fairly small channel, but I'm big enough to attract some colorful comments and some people who are perhaps playing at being trolls or what have you. So that's part of the deal. I'm just, if you do anything public, you're going to have to deal with criticism. You're going to have to deal with people who just won't like you because you're trying. And that's part of it. You have to have some thick skin, I think, in order to have any kind of podcast or YouTube channel or to publish anything, really.
I was just going to say, it's what would you tell somebody whose reason for hesitating on looking for an agent or self-publishing or whatever? I've got my book, but I can't show it to anybody. I get too anxious. I get too nervous. Nobody's going to like it. What do you tell that person?
Believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. If you do the hard work, you go through the process. And again, if you can afford it, work with the editor, do all the right steps, believe in yourself and go for it. And at a certain point, you have to let go of your baby and see how it does out in the world. But you can choose what to focus on as well. I personally don't read negative reviews. I don't feel that unless it's clear that a person is trying to be helpful and constructive and that sort of thing, that's great. But I don't focus on...
Or maybe you asked for it from an editor or something.
Something like that. That's great. I love constructive criticism. But I choose to, once in a while, I'll go onto Goodreads, which I've made my peace with having to be present on Goodreads as an author. Yeah. But once in a while, I'll go there and I'll read a 5-star review just to help me understand, this is why I do this, and some people like it. And so it's worth it. Mm-hmm. And there will be people who will say mean things. And I just choose not to focus on that.
Yeah. Which obviously easier said than done, but to the best of your ability, focus on the positive. It's actually, speaking of Sanderson a few minutes ago, it's a great quote from one of his Stormlight books. What's the most important step you can take? The next one. Just focus on what's the next thing I need to do and stop worrying about, well, when it's over, this might happen. You don't know. Just take the next step, right?
Great advice.
Let's start the process of wrapping up, but I want to do that by asking you for any other specific pieces of advice, any tools, any resources that you have found really helpful as a self-published author. You mentioned, what was it, KVP or some?
Yeah.
What was it called?
Yes, let me give you a few details. There are, first of all, various kinds of software you can get for the formatting. And I do recommend buying one of these. I bought Vellum, which only works with a Mac, but I'm very happy with it. And
you elitist. I can't believe it, Philip.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Sorry about that.
So Vellum for all you Apple users out there.
For the Apple people, Vellum. There are other programs out there, and they tend to be a little bit cheaper. I can't vouch for them because I haven't used them, but I will say I'm very happy with the way. If you like the way the inside of my book looks, that's Vellum. They really. makes it a lot easier for you to do the
I
format.
do I do appreciate that you actually have margins. So
Yes,
thank
yes,
you for
yeah.
that.
So then you have to choose where you're going to, what platform you're going to use to publish. And I ultimately went with probably the two best known. One is KDP, which is Amazon's self-publishing wing. And
Is
so
that
KDP,
KDP?
yep, KDP, yep,
Okay.
Kindle Direct Publishing, I believe is what
Mm.
that stands for. And it's really, I talked to several self-published authors early in the process, and all of them said for ebooks, it's really kind of a no-brainer to go with KDP because they have the lion's share of the market, and you get 70%. You also can enroll in KDP Unlimited, which is a subscription service. And if your book is part of that, then people who are subscribed can read your book. And that is a big source of sales as well. So if you're self-publishing, in terms of the ebook, most people will probably agree that KDP is the way to go. Now, in terms of the physical book, paperbacks, I think there are advantages to KDP, but then there are some disadvantages. So you should know that a lot of libraries and other bookstores will not buy. They don't like to play with Amazon, so they won't buy books published by KDP. So what some of us do, including myself, is I published the physical book with KDP, but I also published it with Ingram Spark, which is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, self-publishing platforms out there. And Ingram Spark publishing there allows, let's say, Barnes & Noble to allow people to order my book, at least on their website. And you can order, I've noticed that it's at Waterstones, it's at Walmart, all kinds of online places where they sell books. Will sell my book, and that's always the Ingram Spark version. So I would advise you to at least do something like Ingram Spark for your physical. You may want to do KDP as well. You can do that. You can publish with both. And one reason that I read about is that Amazon, other people don't like to play with Amazon, but Amazon likes to sell its own products. So having published your book through KDP might be a quicker way to get your book into people's hands.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I remember if anybody's having, you're in the car, you're not writing all this down, that's fine. Go back and listen to it again. Send it to all your friends and have them download it 10 times. That's fine. But if you're having trouble remembering stuff like this, I'll tell you a story. Back when I first started podcasting, 2009, I had just discovered podcasts and I was working in radio, and I thought, oh, this would be really fun. I want to do some podcasting, and I had no idea where to start. I went to my university library and I bought, I'm not kidding you, Podcasting for Dummies. You know, those yellow books?
Yeah.
And I
good investment, I think, Craig.
It was $15, and it walked me through kind of the stuff you're talking about. Here's this piece of software. Here's this thing to consider with, going that route versus this route. And I just looked it up. There is, in fact, self-publishing for dummies.
There we go.
And so I've not been paid to make this endorsement, and I'm not actually endorsing it, but I'm sure that and there are, I'm sure, many other resources out there that'll kind of spell out those specific things. But it's nice to hear what you used, Philip, so that people can, go do likewise. Any other specifics that you think people should know about?
I don't, none that popped to mind. Just like you said earlier, though, one of my favorite proverbs is a Welsh one that says, "It's steady tapping that breaks the stone." And just keep at it. If it's your dream to self-publish your book, there's nobody out there that's going to stop you. It's up to you. You keep at it, keep going, and at a certain point, you do need to say, "All right, I'm ready," and let it out into the world. But do that hard work up front. Do that research. Find out what is going to work best for you. If you can afford it, work with those people who can help you put out the best possible product you can. That's my final word of advice, I suppose.
I love that. What'd you say? It's the constant tapping that breaks the stone. Was that what it was?
It's steady tapping that breaks the
Steady
stone.
tapping.
Yeah.
Um, it's not you're not going to miraculously uh, have all of your dreams come true in
Oh.
one go. Speaking of booktube, I remember talking to Daniel Green a couple of years ago. He and I were at a convention and we were chatting, and he said something about, oh, go look at the first year's worth of videos on my channel. They
Uh-huh.
suck. But I kept making videos and I kept trying and I kept getting better. And eventually, it is that steady tapping. So yeah, I really like that. All
Yeah.
right. So my final question for you, and then I'll let you go, which is predictions for self-publishing. Is
Ooh.
this, while you think about it, I'll tell you what is going through my mind. I was telling you before we started recording, I used to run a YouTube channel about streaming. It was cord cutting and streaming services and devices and all that stuff. And so I there are some echoes of our conversation here as far as, oh, we don't need that mega distributor. We don't need cable anymore. We can just put stuff out on our own little streaming app or whatever.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to a point where the explosion had gone so far that the backlash began. And this was maybe a couple of years ago. The backlash of people saying, wait a minute, I have to buy 20 different streaming services. Wouldn't it be nice if it were all bundled in one location? We could call it cable. Um, with your, so I'm curious about your prediction for self-publishing. Is it something that's going to keep on spreading and dominating publishing, or do you see any possibility for a backlash at some point and people going, that the old dinosaurs in publishing have their problems, but the structure is something we could use, right? This uh, getting together a whole bunch of authors publishing under one banner. What would that be like?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what do you see as the future of self-publishing?
First of all, I don't think traditional publishing is just going to go away. I think that it has served its purpose. There are a lot of people who work in traditional publishing who are doing their best to bring out great stories, and that will remain the case. However, I think that self-publishing is only going to be growing in the future, and that we're already at a point, by the way, where there are more authors who are making a viable living as self-published authors than there are traditionally published authors. So if you look at the average income of a self-published author versus the average income of a traditionally published author, neither one is very high. But these self-published authors are now making a little bit more on average than the traditionally published authors. So that should tell you something about the way things are going. And I think it's just going to continue that way. If you're going to get in this game, though, you really have to be willing to play the marketing game. You got to put on that hat. That marketing hat is not optional. It is absolutely at the heart of this. I have a YouTube channel, big help. I putter around on Twitter as well. I should be
conventions
involved.
And stuff. And
Yeah, I mean, you should. It's a never-ending thing. If you want to be a writer, we can't. That old vision of with your quill and your vellum up in a medieval tower somewhere. Sorry, that's just not going to happen. So yeah, you got to be willing to go out there and do it. But that said, with that caveat, I think that there's just so much energy, so many possibilities. You can get everything that a traditional publisher would get for you. You just have to be willing to go out and get it and have the ability to do it. In other words, the financial ability. But that with that, if you're prepared to do those things, I think you can go pretty far.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think of it as an investment, whether it's your time or your money.
Yep.
The putting in the money up front to get the editor, like you're talking about, and buy the software and all of that, and then the investment of time
Yep.
in marketing and whether it's starting a podcast or a YouTube channel or just getting out to conventions or
Yep.
whatever your guerrilla tactics might be. Think of it as an investment in yourself. And
Yep.
not every investment is going to pay off 20x, but some of them will. And even if it's only 1x, you get to make your money back and have the satisfaction of knowing that you did something big.
Yeah.
So
that's a big deal.
All
And
right.
don't quit your day job too soon.
You're right. After success number one has to be replicated before it's
Yeah.
before you can start thinking about that. Yeah,
Right.
no, absolutely. All right, Philip, thank you so much for taking a few minutes. I really appreciate it. And I'm, like I said, I hope people found this not only entertaining, but also informative. Let this guide you in your self-publishing journeys, or, in your journey of reading self-published authors. Just
Yeah.
understand that there's a lot more that went into it than just writing down the words you see. It's a big deal, and they deserve your respect and attention. So, Philip, thanks once again, and tell people the books they need to go check out. The Adan trilogy. What are they called?
Oh yeah. So first, thank you, Craig. I really appreciate you inviting me here. It's such a pleasure to talk to you and to share our love for storytelling. The Adan trilogy, yes. So the first book is The Way of Adan, and then book 2 is The Prophet of Adan, and book 3 is Return to Adan. And they are all available. You can get them from Amazon if you wish, or you can get them from Barnes and Noble or any independent bookstore that would be willing to order them. So yeah.
So yeah, give them Philip's card somehow.
Yes.
And have them order a bunch of books. All right, and that'll all be in the show notes. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and let me know in Discord what subjects you'd like me to take on in the future, and we will see about doing that. And I will talk to you all next time.